You guys know what they say: third time's a charm, right? And fourth time we give up and just everybody goes home. So I think we figured it out. At least good enough. We are going to be using Skype for this particular episode. I think you guys can hear me. I want to make sure you can hear them before we do anything else, because we're going through Skype and using NDI sources. So now let's do an audio check. Vanguard, can they hear you? Say a number between 1 and 10. All right, let's see if they can guess the number. By the way, if 10 people guess 10 different numbers, they're going to get it. So I got an echo. I shouldn't have an echo. Nothing in here that has an echo. No. They can't. Okay, so no, they heard it. They heard it. One person got it right. Yeah, 2 people got it right. But some people, okay, but here's the thing. Lipri, you guys cheated. Oh, okay. So let's do this then. How about that? All right, now I just got to find the right setting on here. All right, another number. Don't look away. So these guys cheat in my live chat. All right, there you go. Tell me the number. Okay, I know the number now. It is between 1 and 10. What do you say? Somebody could get it if they hear you, and I think I got the right setting now. So, how is 16 between 1 and 10? All right. Well, the other I'm probably getting echo now, but I'm sure they can hear you now. All right. One more time, because but that might be getting echo on me. So
we'll do 8.
Okay. There you go. Did you guys hear that? And then we'll get going here. You guys should be able to hear them. I just wonder if they do, they're gonna get some echo out of this. But I'll mute myself so you won't get that echo.
Oh, I see.
There we go.
Awesome. All right.
There we go. Finally.
Yay! See, who need Bullinator, right? Yeah, there's a little white noise. Sorry about the white noise. I think that is his AC unit. It's okay.
I can turn that off.
I think that's probably where it's coming from. But anyways, welcome everybody. Finally, we can get this going. We have Atheist versus Logic back with us. You guys remember him? He came on and talked about all the reasons why atheism is bad and you shouldn't be atheist, I guess. And we got VanguardFED, who's a patron of mine, who wanted to have a conversation with him. So I'm just going to sit back and chill and let you guys have a conversation, because this is what you guys asked me for. And I guess Jeremy's going to give us a side of evidence for creationism, maybe dive a little bit into epistemology a little bit. But go ahead and you guys introduce yourself and have at it. I'm going to kind of just chill and chime in when I think people want to have me chime in. So go for it, Jeremy.
All right. Well, thanks for having me again. My name is Jeremy Spry. I've got a YouTube channel called Atheism versus Logic and a Facebook page. And just glad to be here.
I, too, am glad to be here. I'm just VanguardFED, currently pretty much a nobody, considering starting my own YouTube channel, but I'm just a ex-Christian, ex-creationist who's very interested in the discussions.
Awesome. Well, thanks for wanting to meet with me one-on-one, and I look forward to a one-on-one conversation. I think we can maybe get more out of it than a lot of people trying to talk. So what made you go from, can you just tell us about going from creationist to, are you an atheist or agnostic?
I am an atheist.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's been a pretty interesting journey. But I'd say probably the questions started when I started reading the Bible, got up to Judges, and then I took a long break after that. The way I describe it is I sort of put those ideas on a shelf and those questions and doubts on a shelf, because I didn't really want to deal with it because there were major social and familial ramifications if I decided to fully address them. But several years later, the cognitive dissonance got too much, and so I said, okay, I need to know if this is true or not. So I started really digging into cosmology, biology, apologetics, started reading a lot of different science and apologetics books of all different sides, and I felt that atheism and evolution and that sort of stuff had much more behind it.
Gotcha. Now, you were a Christian, right?
Yep.
Did you spend much time reading the New Testament?
I I have not, and it's something that I've constantly regretted, and it's definitely something I plan to get into.
Cool. Good. Yeah, never too late, right?
Mhm.
Now, what Christian apologist did you listen to, if you don't mind me asking?
I didn't really listen to much. I read, I can't remember all the authors' names. I read Frank Turek's Stealing from God, and I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I can't remember his name, but The Reason for God was another book um, that I read. And I've read more, but I can't quite remember them right now. My memory is a bit shot, but
Yeah, that's good. So, I mean, and you've watched my videos, right?
yep, I just finished watching all of them today.
Wow. Well, I guess there's not that many. I think there's just 20 something so far, but that's a lot. So my main premise is that it's not really with biological evolution, but with chemical evolution, going from non-life to life, and
Abiogenesis.
yeah. So especially I focus on. I guess you could tell. I probably say more about it on all the Facebook comments that I really end the conversation with people saying, look at a CGI simulation of ATP synthase or protein synthesis, and if you're still an atheist after that, hats off to you. So yeah, I mean, when I look at so my belief is, or my looking at it, is that ATP synthase, which is a molecular machine, is I believe that's too complicated to come about by natural processes, and same with protein synthesis. That when I look at the coordination between DNA, mRNA, tRNA, and the ribosome, again, I think that's something that could not come about by natural processes over time.
How do you know that it is absolutely impossible?
Um, how do I know? I just don't think our universe works that way. That chemicals would arrange themselves into that. I'll call protein synthesis this amazing dance, and this coordinated effort to take a genetic code and build a functional protein out of it. So I just don't think that's how.
I don't think that that's what a lot of scientists really believe, though, is that all of a sudden all of these molecules fell into a working single cell. From my understanding, it's more of a gradual system of building scaffolding that wears away after the fact and just sort of slowly building up in slight steps to get where we are now. So where life started to become from non-life is something decently different in its mechanics than any modern creature.
Right, yeah, I definitely don't believe it was Well, I don't believe atheists think it was spontaneous generation.
Okay.
I believe, yeah, atheists believe in abiogenesis, which is a very slow process, yeah, over, I don't know, the millions or billions of years, going from chemicals to a functioning early cell.
Well, actually, considering how quickly life sprung up as soon as conditions on the Earth became favorable, it seems to be more on the million scales than billions, or at least for abiogenesis.
Right, yeah, there's really not much room for error, right? I mean, it had to happen pretty quickly after the Earth cooled to get us to where we are now.
I wouldn't necessarily say no room for error, but
Oh, a little. Like you said, had to happen quickly, because I think the theory goes that cyanobacteria happened, about 3 to 2.5 billion years ago, and then to me that's even adding another amazing process because you're bringing in photosynthesis. But do you look at one theory over another? I don't know if it's called a theory or if it's called a hypothesis, like RNA world. Are you a fan of that?
I've looked at several of them, and to some degree, I'm too much of a layman to really fully assess them. But I would say if I subscribe to anything, it's more of a more fundamental replicator than any specific RNA or DNA base. Um, so, and honestly, the gist of it is just that I don't know. I don't really have any idea what the first life would be like. I think that there's a lot more investigation that needs to happen. I'm just basically not convinced that it had to have been through some sort of intervention. I think that from how we can see how from the first life to now, how we can see all those changes taking place, that it isn't too much of a stretch to say that a similar sort of system of selection could have occurred prior to that.
Gotcha.
Just
Yeah.
real quick, Jeremy, is this, I don't know if anybody else hears it, but kind of a hiss on your mic, and I'm not quite sure why. Are you using a headset mic or what?
Yes.
Can you guys hear that hiss, or is it just me?
I
I
can
want to
hear
make sure that
like this.
because your audio is very clear, Rand.
Now it sounds good.
Does that sound better?
Yeah, I can't hear a hiss now.
Jeremy?
Okay. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, I
Testing,
only hear
1,
the
2.
hiss when he talks.
Yep.
But it's not,
Jesus. 1, 2, 3.
I don't think he cleared up your hiss. All right, they don't really hear it, so it's okay. Continue on then. As you were.
Okay. Sorry about that. It is a cheap headset. So this is my and I really need to, and you can maybe clear this up for me, is I don't think natural selection applies to chemical evolution. Like
Yeah.
I understand in biological evolution how natural selection works, but with chemical evolution, well, chemicals are still chemicals. It's like they're not losing anything if they don't arrange themselves into a complex mechanism.
So basically all you need to have, from my understanding, is that if you have something that replicates and preserves information and preserves information regarding that replication, and has a selection force acting upon it, then it will undergo, if not specifically natural selection, some sort of selection mechanism. So from my perspective, all we need is some sort of primordial replicator that just copies itself, and has some selection force acting upon it, which I think pretty much any sort of primordial molecule that would be replicating would have that process, since we have varying conditions on the Earth. So I think that would eventually lead to a selection process, whether or not you want to call it natural selection.
Okay, so that is my question. What is the selection then? If you've got, like, let's take the RNA world hypothesis. So you have nucleotides coming together, and you've got, and of course, the base pairs, connect to the opposing base pair. And so let's say you've got RNA that is replicating. What is the selection that chooses one sequence over another? And then, how does that produce? Of course, that can produce, according to the RNA world hypothesis, a ribozyme, which is it acts as an enzyme, but that just can either put some chemicals together or tear some apart. I mean, I see that, and I'm just like, that is just, I just don't see how that could ever get us to a functional protein, and how that could ever get us to protein synthesis. And of course, that's going to happen inside of a membrane, because so when I look at a living cell, the most, I believe the prokaryotic cell is the most simple form of life, and I see multiple functional proteins. I see protein synthesis. It works together. You have functional code. This code is not just random sequences. These sequences are meant to be turned into functional proteins. This is inside a plasma membrane, which itself is very complicated. And I believe that's where ATP synthase is, that functional protein inside of a prokaryotic cell. And then not only that, if that could ever come about by natural processes, it still would have to know to copy its DNA and go through binary fission.
It wouldn't need to know anything. That's because it wouldn't have any sort of intelligences.
Right, I agree.
Well, yeah, so I don't think if you look at these sort of things, though, like the lipid bilayer, what you have is you have polar ends with nonpolar insides, and so that allows it to just sort of automatically fall into this bilayer, which you can find by just sort of dropping lipids in water. And so if you have some sort of... Go ahead.
Can I just say, Stated Clearly has a great video on the lipid bilayer forming, if anyone wants to visualize that. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so if you have any sort of molecule that also has this polar, non-polar, then it will fit within that membrane and just sort of sit there. So you do have some natural mechanisms for things to just be able to sort of fall into those places. I think that we could possibly take a step back here and see that it's more of a complexity coming out of non-complexity. Would that be fair?
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, it's
So-
it's really, I guess you could call it the watchmaker's argument.
Okay. So if we do take this approach where it's like, so one thing that I've recently read, so actually, short little tangent story here. I was reading some Jehovah's Witness creationist literature,
Interesting.
and I started. They were quoting a bunch of scientists talking about how, oh, this couldn't happen. It could never form this way. And I decided I actually wanted to read what they were actually saying and within the context. And it was very interesting, the papers that I read. One of them was this article written by Robert Shapiro, or this paper written by Robert Shapiro, and it talked about how when you have a system such as the Earth, where you have the sun constantly inputting energy, it allows entropy, which is sort of the mechanism acting against complexity arising, to sort of be reversed in a way to where, because of...
I can't hear you anymore.
Oh, you can't hear me?
No. I don't know what happened.
No?
Yeah, your audio kind of dropped out a little bit there, Vanguard.
Am I back now?
Yes.
Yeah, you're back now.
All right, so where did I...
It was only like the last couple seconds.
Okay,
Entropy.
So with entropy is the force acting against complexity arising.
You dropped off again. Maybe.
Oh, God.
Uh. Can't hear you.
Yeah, you kind of dropped off the map now. So why don't you go on real quick while he's trying to figure that out?
How about now?
Yes,
There we go.
yes. Now you're
Awesome.
back. Awesome.
I just switched my USBs. I guess that's what it needed.
Ah.
I'll try to scooch a little bit closer to my computer. Am I still good?
Yes.
Awesome. So yeah. So entropy is the force acting against complexity arising, right? Is that...
What I'm sorry. What is entropy? The definition?
Okay. So entropy is the idea that it's essentially the degradation of things over
Okay.
time.
Gotcha. Okay.
Things will always become more degraded over time.
Okay. Yeah.
Not
Things
really.
become
But
more-
you want an actual definition of it? Because this is where I'll step in.
Please.
And because of super chats, $2 can't. Kyle can't touch this. Hammer time. Entropy. Just for your guys, why don't you guys use this? Entropy is a amount of unusable energy in a system.
Yes.
How about that?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's a very simple basal thing you can go with.
Yep. So it's like it's essentially the increasing of chaos is another way that
Okay.
it can be put. The decrease of usable energy. So he was saying in the article about how the input of the sun's energy into the system of Earth, the law of entropy specifically applies to closed off systems. So once Earth isn't a closed system because you have the sun inputting that energy, it sort of becomes inevitable for things to become more organized and to form systems that operate, which is what could lead to that replicator.
Okay. And yeah, that's the whole art. Yeah. The again, stated clearly, does such a great job that he has his video on RNA world hypothesis shows the warming and the cooling would help the RNA join and also disjoin, and then of course it would attract the opposite, and so that's how it would replicate. Yeah, I'm with you on that. But still, again, as I look at ATP synthase, I look at protein synthesis, I look at the other parts of the most simple form of life here. Even with that happening, I do not believe it would create functional code, functional proteins.
The issue I have, though, is that the simplest form of life we have today is probably far different than the original replicator, because things do advance, and because you have the selection pressure of whatever can make the most efficient use of its resources becomes more populous. If you have this replicator, which probably utilizes energy very poorly, as soon as you get something more complex than that can utilize energy just a little bit more efficiently, the original replicators will be wiped out entirely because they won't be able to compete. So what we have today is essentially the pinnacle of everything that could have been to a degree. So I don't think that because we don't know what that replicator, or because we have the simplest form of life today is probably still drastically different from the original replicator, whatever that was.
Yeah, but we still have it. So I don't know. I mean, I know that's hard because we're talking about a hypothetical form of life, right? A hypothetical protocell. But we know that now we do have ATP synthase. We know we have cyanobacteria, and we've got different prokaryotes that can't perform photosynthesis. And I just still got a hard time because, I mean, we've got to define life, right? Life, what it's metabolizes, it can react to its surroundings, and it can reproduce. I think there's some other things that we could add in there, but when you said, about efficiency, I mean, is the RNA just replicating? Is that, again, does it care? What is it really burning energy? I mean, I guess it's just connecting and disconnecting.
Yeah, so I would actually designate the original replicator as non-life. I would call it something more like a proto-life that would eventually be able to be, it would basically be the foundation of which life was built onto. And I have no idea what that would be. Essentially, I'm just not yet convinced that a mind is the only possible way it could be.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Well, I am, and you know that, and the audience knows that. Because again, I mean, for the protocell, which I've watched videos on protocells, and all they're saying a protocell is, which is not life. It's just functional information, which could be RNA, DNA, inside of a membrane. And even that, if we were able to get, replicating, nucleotides, strings of nucleotides, and get it into it would be probably just a simple drop of oil, a lipid membrane. I believe that's what they think the protocell is. Still, you get that, and then, I mean, say that the RNA kept replicating and it folds different ways, and it becomes a ribozyme, and it can make some chemical reactions. But man, I see that, and I'm still like, that's light years from life. That's light years from a functional protein. Functional proteins I think the average is 200 to 300 amino acids, specific amino acids. It can't be a right-handed amino acid. And we've got to eventually get to DNA that's copied by RNA, brought to the ribosome, and the tRNA brings the specific amino acids, and it builds proteins. And I see that process, and I'm like, there's no way. I know people are working on it, but I think the evidence, when you look at those processes and you look at the different hypotheses, however you say that, I just don't think they come close to describing how these amazing processes and mechanisms, because even the most simple form of life, say billions of years ago, it had to do some of those functions, right? It had to use the RNA, the DNA, it had to build things out of them.
It depends on where exactly you draw the lifeline.
Well, let's go to cyanobacteria. There had to be, the theory, the hypothesis is that there was a living cell that could turn sunlight and carbon dioxide into glucose and oxygen. Mm-hmm. And when we look at the most simple form of photosynthesis now, that's very complex, and it involves this very, complex functional protein called ATP synthase and other things. So I mean, that's a goal. We can all agree. Well, I mean, of course, I'm a young Earth creationist. I know people think that's crazy, but according to the theory of evolution, about 2.5 to 3 billion years ago, there was cyanobacteria. So we know.
Well, that isn't so much within the theory of evolution as much as it's through the analyzation of the fossil record by looking at
right. Okay, there you go. Yeah, because what did it produce? Stromatolites, something like that.
I remember seeing it at the Natural History Museum.
Yeah. So I would just encourage people, the listeners, to look up CGI simulations of ATP synthase, photosynthesis, protein synthesis, and binary fission. Again, even if a living protocell came about by natural processes over time. It had to know to copy its DNA, take it to different sides of the cell, and close the plasma membrane or the lipid bilayer, a more simple form of a plasma membrane.
It definitely didn't need to know that, though.
Well, it had to do it somehow without knowledge. Right, we're talking about chemicals.
Yes,
that's my argument.
It just had to...
Chemicals don't know. Chemicals don't care. They don't care for their life.
You're completely correct. They don't care.
Right.
But if you have anything that starts replicating, though, then it will inherently become more complex to utilize more resources. And we have seen where simple cells become more complex when put under strenuous conditions like are you familiar with the Lenski experiment?
No.
Yeah, he took 12 strains of bacteria and put them into a nutrient broth, and he allowed them to replicate over, like, I think now it's been like 30, 40 years. But they originally started as just a typical E. coli strain, but they started diverging to the point where one strain was even able to metabolize citric acid, which the original cell was completely incapable of doing. So
hang on, that's not true.
Okay.
E. coli can always process citrate, but it can only do it anaerobically. And so it built another metabolic pathway to allow it to do it in a oxygenated environment. It could do it in a non-oxygenated, but the metabolic pathway was changed, and I think it had to give up the ability to metabolize maltose, if I'm not mistaken. But it didn't all of a sudden have the ability to do it. It was already there, but it can only do it in a non-oxygenated environment.
Okay.
So in the presence of oxygen, it can, if I remember correctly. But just throw that out there.
That sounds right, but my memory is still a little rusty.
Real quick, super chat. Win for $5. I tend to skip episodes where apologists pretend to be scientists. I stop to thank you for your nonstop improvement to your channels. Thanks, Steve. And I appreciate it. By the way, we will get some of this audio stuff worked out. It's just been, we've been so, you guys don't even know what's been going on behind the scenes. So much stuff with Cheshire and Nick and other stuff. We got a lot of stuff going on. So we all have things to do, and so it's been kind of hectic. But we will get it all sorted out. But we are trying to make some improvements. But we're getting good quality content coming on. That's for sure. But
so essentially, when you see how things can increase their complexity through pressures, as soon as you have some sort of fidel or a faithful replicator of some description, it will inherently become more complex. So you don't need to have DNA falling into a lipid bilayer in order to get the first life form. You just need something that is capable of replicating itself.
So I guess my next question would be is if some RNA got into a lipid bilayer or even just a simple drop of oil, would that keep other nucleotides from coming in? Because then it could no longer replicate from the cooling and heating up if that membrane would keep out nucleotides, which you and I might not be able to answer.
Yeah, that's. Yeah. I think we don't have enough science to really answer any sort of specific questions. But as soon as we get something that is capable of replicating, whether it's RNA based or not, it would just start growing in complexity from there. So I definitely don't think that RNA is necessarily the only way it could go about. But I don't know what other ways what ways it could come about, but I'm just not convinced that a mind is necessary for it, since we see things growing in complexity. Could you actually describe exactly why you say that complexity is so would you agree that complexity is the hallmark of design? Is that something you'd agree with?
The hallmark. Yeah.
Okay.
Complexity. Yeah, useful complexity, not just a bunch of stuff. It's
there we go.
Like a functional, functional complexity.
Okay. So why is it that can only come about by a mind then?
Well, because, just say we put, a bunch of, if I put a Lego set together, or I put the pieces of a Lego set into a hot tub, so it's moving, those pieces would never come together into this, the Lego set. We just don't see that in our world, that these complex machines and processes come about naturally. People have to work on it. I've
Yeah,
never seen. Go ahead.
that's, in my opinion, sort of comparing. I think that that's an unfair comparison, comparing it to like Legos, because if you do have, let's say, some sort of Lego-like thing that does stick together, and you put it in a box and you shake it up and things start sticking together, eventually they'll probably start like sticking together, breaking apart, sticking together, and some things will stick together stronger than other things. And those things, if as you shake the box more and more, the things that have the strongest connection would stay connected, and the things that have weaker connections will break apart, right? So as you continue to shake this box, you'll eventually get to where the only things in the box are the things that can connect strongly. And
Right.
so then as you shake it more and more, maybe those things will start sticking together and breaking apart. And so you get the same sort of progression of complexity over time when you have this constant mixing, as long as you have that selection process.
Real quick,
Yeah.
Brian.
Go ahead.
Real quick, Brian says for $5. We do see complex things come together by random chance. This can be shown with genetic algorithms, which are based on biological evolution.
Exactly.
I think so as well. A lot of these things are basically biochemical reactions that have just affinities with each other.
Have you ever heard of the website? I think it's called like 2dboxcar.com or something like that.
No.
Well, they have it's basically a website where it creates based on a DNA type analog, where it's a code of strings that convey specific information. It creates a car based on like different angles, and they have like wheels in different points, and it's all randomized. But if you leave this system running, basically whatever travels the farthest length along the track, its DNA becomes the basis for the next generation. And so through these computer simulations, like mentioned in the super chat, that you slowly get a better and better car. You can see they have like a leaderboard of all the best cars, and like over half of them were randomly generated and selected, as opposed to specifically designed by people to do the specific task for the course that they were set for. So with the computer systems, you can see how once you have that pressure and you have a replicator, it will develop in complexity specified for its specific task. If that task, in which in the idea of biology would be replication.
Did these cars run by a motor, or was it gravity on a ramp?
So these cars are completely digital, so they don't have any mechanisms to them, but essentially the wheels have spin in one direction.
Okay, gotcha. So they've got some kind of, of course, digital. It's not a real car, but it had, the simulation had a motor built in the wheels.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay, right. Yeah, and that's my beef, is that it's the creation of the motor. I mean, so take that analogy and tell them to create a motor from scratch, not just, because that's what I'm talking about. We've got these functional proteins that are like motors.
And that's sort of exactly what I'm saying, is that as long as you have that motor, would essentially be the equivalent of just the replicator. And as soon as you have that, it carries on itself from there, is what I'm saying. So it's essentially not how do you get complex life out of nothing, but how do you get some sort of replicator out of nothing? Now it's still completely unsolved question, but it's much easier to imagine something coming about naturally like that, just some sort of replicator, than the complex cell with ATP synthase, with RNA traveling through and in and out of the nucleus and all of that.
Okay. Well, let's say that, the RNA world hypothesis, it does produce a functional protein inside a membrane. How does it put that protein to use?
I don't know.
Right, yeah, and then in a ribosome is crazy complex. It's made of, I think, different proteins that totals like 7,000, or I think it's like over 7,000 amino acids that make up different proteins inside the ribosome.
But again, that's modern life. That's not what probably created the foundation for the building blocks of life, essentially.
Yeah, but it had to get there. I mean, And I know that's all we've got to work with right now are these modern.
And that's what I'm saying, is that as soon as you get some sort of replicator, it will get there if that's more efficient and can occur. If it is possible in any way, shape, or form, it will eventually arrive there.
Jeremy, we have a defeater argument for you. God's auditor says for $2, he says, look at Red's face and tell me there's a God. Because anybody who knows Red's rhetoric, if you've ever seen him, probably no God created or designed that. It would be.
Look at Red's face.
Yeah, it's horrific.
God.
Real quick,
funny.
let me ask you guys. You guys, every time we have these discussions, a lot of these common terms come up, like ATP synthase and things like that nature. So let me ask the live chat. Years ago, I had some videos. I actually did videos explaining ATP synthase, electron transport chain, a few other things. Do you think that since then we've had, a huge inflow of new people coming to the channel? So do you guys think that would be beneficial to the audience one day if we have biologists come in and actually explain to people what people are talking about when they start saying ATP synthase, peptide chain, protein synthesis, our ribosome, and just kind of do a very basic primer on the fundamentals of biology, like the central dogma of biology? Because I've done those things before, but I would actually bring in an actual biologist. But I think that it might be something interesting. If the live chat would be interested in that, let me know, and I will set something up. We'll have a little presentation on that, because I think that would kind of help, because a lot of people I know talk to me and they're like, yeah, we love these conversations, but when they start talking about ATP synthase, we have no idea what the hell they're talking about. So
Okay, I'll start saying molecular machine. I don't think a molecular machine could come about by natural processes by itself. And then of course I don't think all these different machines could even if they were able to form inside of a membrane, would know how to work together. And that's really my main premise. And then even if that happened, I don't think it would divide.
I believe that I think the leading idea is that they didn't just sort of fall in together, but they had some sort of scaffolding built around them that assisted to them to get to that point. And then after that point was reached, it was more efficient to dump the scaffolding and keep everything else. So I don't think that's what people are saying did happen.
Right. Yeah, and I know it's evolving over time, but still, yeah, I'm just not buying it. I'm just not buying it. Well,
yeah, would you mind if, since we seem to be sort of stuck on this point, would you mind if we switch tracks a little bit?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so you said that you're a young Earth creationist, correct?
Yes, but that's
okay.
That's just because Jesus said so.
All right, so let's. So how old would you say the universe is?
I would say under 10,000 years old.
Okay, so do you have a solution to the distant light problem then?
Yes, I believe he made the stars with age, so Adam and Eve could see them.
Okay, so did he create? So what about stars that are like far, far away that all we see is the remnants of a supernova?
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's like a movie playing that never happened.
Yeah, because that light would be coming from something that doesn't exist and
yeah,
didn't exist.
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I know. I think it's Jason Lyle is his name. He thinks that maybe light goes a different speed in one direction. I don't know if you've heard him talk about that. Yeah, but Steve. Yeah, we kind of covered this
about asynchronous light.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, I don't think this is a horse that we want to beat again. Pretty much like Jesus turned water into wine. It was aged grape juice, and I believe Adam, if you would have observed him with a scientist, he would look like he was probably 20, and he was a few days old. So
Vanguard, he's basically saying, it's called the Omphalos hypothesis, that the universe could have been created yesterday with exactly as it is today, and of course that isn't falsifiable.
Yeah, I think I recall this maybe coming up on another stream that you did, or at least I definitely remember reading similar apologetics. So yeah, so you believe that do you believe that humans were a special creation then as well?
Oh yeah.
All right, so where do the hominids fall?
Are those just non-human bipedal right under Homo sapiens?
There are a wide variety from all the way to there's a wide variety of hominids at all sorts of various stages. And what even is a hominid is debated because it's hard to draw lines between them. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't studied that.
Okay.
But it wouldn't surprise me if they found just human remains. And of course, if you've got and I know you guys, this is offensive, but confirmation bias. If you believe a certain thing, as in biological evolution, and then you might make the remains fit into that theory.
Well, as we sort of discussed a little bit earlier, I came into my investigations with the opposite bias. And what I saw with the extreme level of orderliness to the fossil record, where you only have like single-celled organisms for like 75% of the fossil record, and then you start getting like aquatic life, and then you start getting like fish, and then you start getting amphibians, and then you start getting reptiles, and then you start getting mammals. That orderliness is what convinced me that it would be very difficult to get this orderliness without having essentially millions of special creations. And even then, the special creations would have had to have been creating an escalation. So that to me seems like a very major issue and contradictory to the essential creationist claims.
Gotcha. Yeah, I need to study that more because, of course, my none of that matters if chemical evolution ever happened, right?
Well, no, it
so
does.
That's where I've
Because
been.
if we do see that all of that occurred, then it had to start somewhere. And even if we don't know what that start is, even if we say abiogenesis could have been started by a mind, we still can be confident in everything that followed it. And especially if you get such a huge track record of a gradual increase in complexity, it becomes much easier to infer farther back that you had something else that was very simple that gradually became more complex.
Gotcha.
Because then you have a pattern to base it upon.
Gotcha. Well, would you be willing to think that there was a creator of some sort that started life on Earth, that seeded it?
I would be willing to consider it, but I would need evidence towards that hypothesis.
And you don't think the molecular machines are enough?
No,
evidence?
Because I'm not convinced yet that it's impossible to come about through exclusively a mind.
Gotcha.
That's what I'm still not sold upon.
Did you probably watched my video that life kills atheism, where I talk about the probability of a functional protein forming?
Yes, and I think that again comes back to the whole that wasn't the first thing that happened. We had something much earlier that was probably much more simple that allowed those complex proteins to develop.
Well, it had to happen though, right? I mean, even if something else is trying to make it happen. I mean, we're talking about.
It's more like. Well, so how long did you say the average the average length was?
We'll go with 200.
Okay, so if you say that the 200 one had to come about by chance, well, it's a much easier for a 200 one to come about when you already have a 199 length one, which that one is much easier to come about if you have a 198 length one. So that sort of gradual buildup allows for things to get to that point.
Well, I related it to like a password. And I still think it's a try, even if it's 199 and you add a 1, that's still a try. Sure. That's an attempt at the password, right? And even if you took that 1 off and you put on a different one, that's still an attempt. But all those other ones had to be right. So it's like it's all or nothing. And how does it know that the 199 were right and you're just trying one at a time?
It's not all or nothing though, because all you need is something that if it can be much shorter and still be functional to where it reproduces, that's all you need. If you can then add something on and it doesn't increase in efficiency of its metabolism, then that will probably fail compared to the other one. But if you have something that does become more efficient, then that's going to be selected for. And so you do get a sort of trial and error build-off. So it's not like if I have a 200 character long password and you're trying to guess it through brute force random inputs, that's going to be very difficult. But if you can just guess the first letter and it tells you that the first letter is right, then you can guess the second letter, and then once that gets right, you can slowly build on from there.
Well, two things. I don't think proteins reproduce.
No.
And there's nothing to tell it that first one was right. So in other words, you got to put them all together.
What I meant by it being right is just the increase in efficiency of processing here.
And I don't think that happens, because if you've got a few amino acids, that doesn't even get you close to the whole thing. The whole thing has to come together and fold. Amino acids fold, and they have these other bonds besides the peptide bonds. That
by the way, real quick point of order: there are misshapen proteins. Certain proteins, when they don't fold properly, like usually they'll have these what's called chaperones. So the protein will go into that chaperone and it'll help fold the protein properly. But if a protein doesn't fold properly, it can form prions. Prions can self-replicate, from what I understand.
So proteins can self-replicate. How do they self-replicate if it's just amino acids that are bound and folded? What would copy it?
Yeah, I do not remember how prions do that.
Okay.
Yeah,
because I understand how RNA with the heating and the cooling would reproduce, but I wasn't aware that proteins would reproduce.
I'm not sure either. I haven't done too much research on specifically prions, but
yeah, I know. I mean, I've just looked it up. They can reproduce. Prions have the ability to reproduce, despite the fact they contain no nucleic acid genome. But I don't know the chemistry behind that, so I'm not even going to.
Yeah, that's interesting.
But I do know that prions are just misshapen proteins for the most part. The peptide chains, right? So.
Yeah, because you can get because prion diseases can be contractable, so right. That would require some level of replication.
Yeah.
And that's not just something messing with the ribosome to make the sequence wrong?
Well, no, there's not. These are going to be, no, it's going to be the folding process of the protein, right? A prion protein is something that's been misfolded. That doesn't do something functionally what it's supposed to be. If you don't fold a protein correctly, it's not going to do its desired job.
Right.
So
right.
That's what a misfolding of protein would be. Mad cow disease is a prion disease, right?
Yeah, so that even adds to the complication of the password. So even if you've got the proper sequence of the right amino acids, it has to fold properly. And you said there's a mechanism in living cells that checks the folding of the proteins?
Well, from my understanding, chaperones guide the folding.
Okay. Yeah, again, I mean, it's just crazy complex. I mean, these are amazing things that are happening inside the most simple form of life on Earth. And I don't think it's reasonable to think that these things could come about by natural processes.
But
especially
from the evidence, that seems to be there seems to be a very strong support for the idea of some sort of simple-celled organism becoming as complex as a modern animal, higher animal like us. Then it doesn't seem like much of a stretch to see something that goes from a simple replicator to some sort of operational cell.
Oh, this makes sense. Yeah, they wouldn't be a self-replication. That makes sense. Thank you for the live chat. They wouldn't be a self-replication. What they would be is they would be able to transfer their misfolded shape onto some normal variation of the protein. So if you have a misfolded protein, it could actually cause other proteins to become misfolded. That's how it would replicate.
I actually just got a text from a neuroscientist friend of mine who said the exact same thing.
Okay, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. I had to think about that too. So wait, he's actually watching this?
They are, yes.
I got neuroscientists watching this stuff?
Not necessarily. I a neuroscience graduate.
Whatever. No, you know what? Mine sounds better.
So again, that makes it even more
watching this. Cool, thanks.
More complex if you've got something that could be folded wrong and could hurt the ones around it. So here's another way to think about it. So two ways that they could help prove unguided abiogenesis is that they could show us more than what they're showing us as far as these chemicals arranging themselves and becoming more like a modern cell. and then they could show a modern cell degrading. They could see if they could take out some pieces and show the opposite of evolution, like to try to get us to a simpler form. Because I would argue, and I know atheists hate the term irreducible complexity, that there's so much that's dependent upon other parts in the living cell, that if you take out or you change, the cell's not able to live. And again, with the whole RNA world hypothesis, the scientists had to help some things happen. It wasn't happening naturally. And if people watch the Stated Clearly video, they'll see that.
But
Go ahead.
That's just because we don't understand how it did come about. Because we don't know what conditions to actually replicate. It doesn't, just because we can't succeed in manipulating it to get that way, doesn't mean it's impossible for it to ever happen.
Yeah, I get you, and I understand that's the way you guys think, and I still disagree. I just think it's too amazing, too specific.
But isn't that an argument from incredulity? I mean, you're just saying, well, this is amazing, and by the way, it really is, but it's not amazing to the point where you go, I have to think that there's a deity that created this, and at the very best case, it'll get you to like a deistic type god, right?
Right, and that's what I'm going for. Partially, it's just for people to even just go to that something let's something started life.
Let's try taking a different type of development of complexity. So there were some scientists who found a species of, I believe it was Italian fence lizards living on a island. And they, specifically to see what would happen, took like 7 pairs of them, I believe it was, and transplanted them to another island that didn't have any of them on it at all. Mm-hmm. And they watched what had happened to them over time. And something that they found that was really interesting was it developed a cecum valve, which allowed it to process plant matter more effectively. Its jaws got wider and its teeth got flatter to be able to properly ground the plant matter, because plants were more abundant in arthropods, which is what they fed on the other island, were fewer. And so they developed specific abilities to digest plant matter better because they had more plants there. So yeah, you have development of complexity over time as long as you have that selection pressure. And so I think that it needs to be demonstrated that that's impossible to happen on a lower level for me to be able to accept that a mind is necessary for the development.
Yeah, they were called Italian wall lizards for the cecum valve.
Yep, wall lizards, not fence.
Yeah, their sphincter muscle that was reduced.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good for them.
Yeah, so I mean, these are things that people would expect to see if evolution is the case, right? Would expect to see formations of new structures. That was a new structure. There used to be somebody in our community ages ago, and I don't remember their name. Jade, rest her soul, used to talk about him quite frequently. But there's a person in our community that actually had a mutation that had a extra vein in their heart, or artery. Sorry, it was an artery, I believe. And they actually didn't even know until they had a heart attack. And if it wasn't for that extra artery, they would have died. And so that is a novel new structure that was beneficial, that had he reproduced would have been translated to the children, right? Or it would have been continued on through the germline. So that is a new structure that was produced just because of a mutation. That's what we would expect to see in evolution. And if you have all those iterations over and over and over again, so every generation is producing something different, and over a very long period of hundreds, thousands, millions of years, you're going to have completely different organisms for the most part.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, and of course I believe that's something that God put in animals and life to help them adjust, but yeah, I'm still...
But that's sort of, to me, that seems like just another assumption of a possibility, which is the same thing that I see you doing with the fact that this sort of proto-life replicator, or life after the proto-life replicator, couldn't have come about without a mind. That's the assumption that I'm not seeing the evidence for.
In unguided abiogenesis, you're not seeing the evidence for...
Well, it depends strongly on what you mean by unguided, because I believe that there was a guiding process behind it.
Gotcha. Yeah, mindless. Let's say mindless
Yes.
abiogenesis. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. I'll start using that instead. Um, yeah. Yeah. I mean, we might be at an impasse here because I think that's what it comes down to. You either look at molecular machines and say that could come about by small changes over time, or you look at them and say that was designed. And of course, I fall under the
Well,
category.
I think that it's different. It's saying, I think you're saying it's impossible that it could have come about any other way than how I think it came about. And I'm saying I'm just not sure of that.
God, yeah. Okay.
I'm
Yeah.
just not
You're saying it
convinced that
could
it
come about.
couldn't. Yeah,
Right.
I'm not saying that I'm not certain that it couldn't have.
Right. I gotcha. So you're saying it could or it might not have, and I'm saying it can't. So I've got the more definite stance.
Yeah, I still haven't ruled out the idea of panspermia yet.
Which is
That's
life
the idea
from,
of life, yeah, coming from space, basically.
yeah, which to me just changes that life developed somewhere else.
Yeah, but
So-
that somewhere else could have had radically different systems, radically different molecules, radically different pressures that we
Yeah.
have no access to be able to even speculate about what could potentially be there.
Gotcha.
So it makes it very hard for me to say it's impossible for anywhere anything like this to develop.
Right. Yeah. So we just simply believe two different things.
That's what it seems to be coming down to.
Yeah.
You believe it as absolutely impossible for any sort of proto life replicating molecule to develop into a more complete organism. And I'm
Right.
not certain that it's impossible. So what do you have anything other than the basically complexity that to imply that it would be impossible?
No, I think that's it.
All right, well, let me ask you this then, Jeremy, because you said that you're going to have like scientific evidence for creationism, but it sounds like just an argument that I want to believe, which is okay. Okay, fine, I get that. I think it's not a great epistemological approach, but let's say that Vanguard wanted to know the age of the Earth. Let's say he was a skeptic, but he was inquisitive and scientific and smart and knew physics and science, without having any knowledge of creationism whatsoever, because that didn't come about till much later with Usher and then with Ellen G. White with the Seventh-day Advent. So that was long after most of the Christians they didn't think that the Earth was young. This is a relatively modern phenomenon. But if he wanted to learn the age of the Earth, what by creationist science could he actually use by experimentation and demonstration that the Earth is actually 6,000 to 7,000 years old? And obviously, the phallus hypothesis will not work to solve that. So what could he do as an experiment?
Well, first, I don't think it's modern. I think anyone in the past who took the Old Testament as God's word would realize that, if Adam was the first human, even if they didn't add all the numbers up directly, they would have thought it would have been very young. But of course, then there was other theories of, how much time passed since God's, made the heavens and the earth, and then he actually started doing things on them. But of course, I stick to Jesus's words that he said Adam and Eve were at the beginning of creation. So that's why I'm a young earth creationist. If again, like I said during the debate or the conversation on young earth creationism, it's a miracle to me. And so if we're just looking at science, you cannot ignore the distant starlight, and that would point to an old universe.
So you would agree that if he would take independent objective measurements, everything that he could possibly do, any experiment that he possibly could do that would actually demonstrate any indication of the age of the Earth, whether it be geometric, whether it be something relating to astrophysics, something like that, then every experiment he can do, all of them would have a consilience that the age of the Earth is around 4.5 billion years, universe is around 13.9 billion years, 13.8, give it, around that area. So there's nothing he could do to ever demonstrate to himself or anybody else that the Earth and the universe was anything but that age. Now, if that's the case, which I think you would agree with at this point, right?
Well, I think you're more knowledgeable on this than I am because you've critiqued it. Where I just, anytime a young Earth creationist talked about evidence, of course, I ate that right up, like the decay of the Earth's magnetic field. I'm sure, you know, people work that out to where it fits in their old universe hypothesis. And same with comets. Of course, they created the theory of the Oort cloud, which I don't think has been observed, to explain comets in our solar system, which should have burned up by this point.
The thing with that is that none of that's actually true. What you're saying is actually what Hovind has actually promoted, that there's no scientific standing for. It's just Hovind has said it, therefore it must be the case. There's nothing.
I've heard it from Jason Lyle. I'm not a Kent Hovind fan.
Jason Lyle has signed his soul away by saying any evidence that goes against the younger creationist narrative must be discounted by fiat. That's not science at that point.
Right, it's faith-based. I mean, distant starlight tells us that.
And that's sort of exactly why I ended up leaving the positions I had, because I believed that if the God that I believed in existed, then I believed that it should be able to be found by anyone at any time. Essentially, it should be able to derive objectively without making any assumptions beforehand. And when I couldn't do that, when I failed to be able to find that evidence, then I realized that I couldn't justify my own beliefs over any others. Like, if you look at Hinduism, their universe creation story starts about 14 billion years ago, which is about how old the universe seems to be when we analyze the cosmic microwave background. So they seem to have gotten that more correct than Christianity did, which then when you're looking at it from an objective reality standpoint, it becomes very hard to be able to justify the Christian creationist position at that point.
Yeah, without explaining that, God made things with age. Yeah, which is the way we at least me and other young Earth creationists, because if we think that, I think the universe is so big. So let's, think from my perspective that God made the universe and he made humans special in his image and nothing else. Well, he wanted us to be full of wonder. So there's this massive universe, and it's fun. I think it's amazing, and it's fun to think about how big it is and the size. And so if he made that for us, it makes sense that he wanted us to see it. So even if he created a movie of things out there that never really existed because they would have had to exist 14 billion years ago or 13.9, it's still congruent with my belief system that the universe was made for humans.
Sure.
And of course he wanted to speed that. I mean, he wasn't going to tell Adam and Eve, hey, don't go sinning on me, because you're going to have to wait 13.9 billion years for some of these stars to come to your eyes.
It can definitely be consistent, but consistency doesn't imply correctness. I could write a series of science fiction novels that perfectly are consistent with one another, but that doesn't make them any more correct. And correctness is what my aim is at.
Amen. And so why I do believe in Jesus, that I'm going against the evidence of distant starlight, is really by experiencing him, and by reading. So I'm 35. I just had a birthday, so I don't think how old I am. So I've been living for Jesus for 18 years, and so as I've been, studying the Bible and trying to live for him. Of course, nobody's perfect. I see it working, right? Like all the relationship advice and all the wisdom in the Bible, and so that's really where I think a lot of us, that's where our faith is coming from, is this experiential. And I know that I can't impose that on anyone. I can tell you.
The problem is that when I would have members of the Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints and members of the Jehovah's Witnesses telling me the exact same thing. And so I became, how can I be sure that they seem to truly believe what they're saying? They seem to truly believe that God told them that Joseph Smith was a true prophet and that the Book of Mormon is a true book. So how can I know that the feelings I'm having aren't also incorrect like theirs are?
Yeah, Jeremy,
Yeah.
don't you think that oh, by the way, super chat, Josiah Hanson, $2, full of wonder but without knowledge of good and evil. And Brian Stevens, $2, what convinced him at 17? We'll get into that. But what Vanguard's saying is something that it always bothered me as well. If all these people are claiming the truth, God, I think, would have created an objective standard by which people can measure if he is an honest God, if he's not a deceptive being. The Omphalos hypothesis, this last 2 days deism, is a dishonest God. He's actually making things appear to be different and making things confusing. And God is not the author of confusion, right? So if somebody wanted to say, I want to know the truth, I want to learn what the age of these things are, for him to create it as Tuesdayism kind of thing is deception. He would have created it in a way to say, if you want to know the truth, this is what you have to learn. This is the experiments you have to do. And I think by now everybody agrees, all evidence points to an old Earth and old universe. There is no evidence in science. Nothing. Zero. Nilch. Which is nil and zilch together, by the way.
I mean, the Oort cloud is a hypothesis that has not been seen, right?
But
I mean,
yeah, but there's still evidence
right
for it. It's theoretical, but there's still evidence that exists. I mean, we didn't.
Well, are you saying the evidence is just comments?
Well, no, we didn't see a black hole until just recently, right? I mean, we knew they had to exist. The mathematics said they had to exist. We knew there was something there, but we never observed one until just 5-6 months ago.
Yeah.
Same thing with the Oort cloud. We know it's there. We know there's something there. We just haven't been able to directly observe it because it's just so far away and so small a body's in it, mostly.
So how do they know it's there?
Because of perturbations of gravitational fields.
Okay, gotcha. So it's not just that there's comets.
Yeah.
So that was my impression, is they were just trying to explain why comets still exist.
It's more like you can see muddy footprints walking across the carpet and the back door open, so you can probably presume someone walked through here. Sure, maybe there was a dog wearing shoes that somehow trotted across, but that would need to be further evidenced, and it's a much more reasonable conclusion to assume what you can see there.
Now, wouldn't the comets or wouldn't the debris in the Oort cloud get to a point where it stays in its orbit around the sun? So what makes debris come out of the Oort cloud into our solar system where we see comets? So you're saying there's no evidence, and I'm just questioning that. Are you sure there's no evidence, or is this just a hypothesis that was created to explain evidence for a young universe?
I'm not sure.
Which I'm asking Steve.
I'm sorry, what?
I said, what is making the debris leave the Oort cloud? Wouldn't it get to a point where it stays in its orbit?
Well, anytime you have perturbations, you can have something in that field that's causing these things to be knocked out of orbit, right? We don't know what's at these things extend very, very, very far.
Right.
Right. I mean, some of the clouds go out almost like 3/4 away to Alpha Centauri, right?
Okay.
So they're very, very far away. They're not like it's just next door. It's not like the asteroid belt, right? These things are a lot farther than what people think. I think if I'm correct, some of them go like 2 light years or something. I'm guessing. I can't look at this, but so we could detect certain objects like Sedna and what's some of the other make those things, because they're larger sides. But most of the other stuff is not that large, right?
Right.
But we can
go ahead.
We can definitely detect gravitational changes.
Right. So I'm saying that by now, wouldn't that have pretty much gotten to a point where everything is moving together, and it would take a lot of force to knock something out of that to our solar system? Because you're saying there's no evidence for a young universe. I'm saying comets might be. I think you're working on hypothesis.
How is comets? I mean,
because they would have lost by this point, they would have lost their mass. Every time they got near the sun.
Yeah, but again, there's so many in the Oort cloud that they're always getting knocked out of orbit.
Right, but I'm saying, what's the energy that's causing that? Because it seems like they would reach an equilibrium.
There's bigger objects there too, and they're knocking into each other. I mean, the physics in space is complicated. I just got Kerbal Space Program.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Glitch, for getting that for me. I'm going to be trying that out. But I can tell you right now, I'm not looking forward to it. Only the fact because I could just imagine how difficult it is, because that is actually based upon actual physics of space, right? I mean, so you're dealing with very complicated equations. You're dealing with like 3-body diagrams. In fact, it's so complicated, it's ridiculous. But in fact, it seems simple. 3-body diagram seems simple, but still to this day, there's no actual general solution to a 3-body diagram. So you're dealing with a lot of complex tensor equations when dealing with this types of physics.
Okay, yeah. But I'm saying that still might be evidence for a young universe, because it's never been observed that debris left the Oort cloud within this time. And
you're taking something that says, oh, well, let's say we don't have an explanation for this. That is not evidence for young Earth. Evidence for young Earth would be positive evidence, right?
It would be that there are still comets.
But that's not evidence for a young Earth.
If comets lose mass orbiting the sun, and the Big Bang happened 13.9 billion years ago, then they should be gone
being produced
by the Oort cloud, which there's no evidence that debris leaves the Oort cloud.
Well, yeah, there is actually. That's the whole point. We actually know that we can see these coming from these directions, right? We see them coming from. I think if I remember correctly, the Oort cloud is like split into parts. But again, they can model it. We can model the Oort cloud. We just can't visually see it because most of the particulates in that particular cloud are so small that they're just not going to be visible from the Earth. I mean, think how far away these things are.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But you're saying that all the evidence for a young universe has been disproven, and I'm butting up against that and saying, has it been proven, or is it just people who already hold the view of an old universe believe these hypotheses?
But I think you misunderstand the difference between positive evidence and evidence where we have a phenomenon but you can't yet explain. There's a difference there. Positive evidence for it to be a young Earth is, hey, I have a sample of rock here, and I did a radiological experiment on it, and hey, you know what? This rock, it's sitting in between all these other rock layers that date millions of years old, but this little rock, it's only 600 years old or something. How to get there? That would be an anomaly, right? That would be something we don't know.
Right.
But
so
if all the rocks dated for 6,000 years, all of them, that would be evidence for a young Earth.
Okay, so the Earth's magnetic, the rate of decay of the Earth's magnetic field.
Yeah.
So you're saying that has been debunked?
That has been debunked. That's Humphrey's work. Yeah.
Okay, how did he debunk it? Did he say that it oscillates and how it decays? The rate?
You would have to look. You would have to look at the equations. I'm
not
going to look at the. Yeah, those are complex things. I don't even know how to even begin to try to even answer that question. To be honest with you, because I've looked into it before on Humphrey's work. It's a lot of mathematics that I'm not that good at. So.
Well, I would encourage your listeners to take an honest look at what young Earth creationists say is evidence for it, and see if it's truly been debunked, or if it's just people create these hypotheses to if their old Earth creationist view.
Well, let me ask you this:
old Earth.
If Humphreys had actually, and by the way, I have debunked Humphreys on other things. I do understand certain other things like polonium halos, and I understand a little bit about helium diffusion rates. I did have two scientists come on, Dr. Henke and Dr. Lechaut, and we actually, the three of us, for over a period of 2 4-hour hangouts, debunked his work completely. He made huge mathematical errors, and I'm thinking that he did so willfully. We actually showed the mistakes he made by him taking an equation that was a very standard equation and actually changing that equation in order to fit his model that he wanted. That's not how physics work. So these PhDs that you're citing are not reputable. They will change things to fit their narrative, hoping that people will not figure it out. And I've seen other people do it. Thompson does it as well. Thompson, on his human chromosome 2 fusion site, he has just bullshitted the data to no end. And we had Glenn Ruhiff debate that. We had other people come in and show all that to be completely Wrong. He doesn't have any evidence to support his narrative that there's any kind of actual functional gene on the DDX called DDX11 on the canonical transcript. So when you're saying, well, has this stuff debunked? Yeah, because these people do not publish in scientific journals because they know it would never be published in a scientific journal because it's not actually correct. They realize this. This is why I have a photo here, and I know you got to go here, so let me just wrap this up. But look at the photo that I have. That's a creation museum. Now go look at the Smithsonian. I mean, the creationist museums are a joke. They're there for like a tourist trap. They're there to cater to the very select few people that for some reason want to hold on to this faith that they were told by their friends and family and born into that the earth is young. But go to this if you really want to be honest, and I know you're a nice guy, man. I like you, Jeremy. I really do. You are an honest, nice guy, and you are the type of person that I love having around. But go look at actual museums, science and history museums, natural history museums. That is where you're going to learn the age of the earth. That is going to be where you're going to show that the evidence for the young earth does not exist.
I also think that you might find some interesting things if you do dig a bit deeper into like the fossil record and like distributions of biogeography. Those were some things that were pretty interesting for me to read.
Okay, I'll do that. But about like the Creation Museum not having as much money spent on it, I think Christians spend their money differently, right? They're probably more likely to give to other ministries or missionaries that are not just building a building to teach creationism. So whereas seculars, those who give money from the secular standpoint might invest more into the advancement of science and scientific museums and things like that. So just because the money's not there I don't think that's reason to discredit a view, because those who hold that view might be throwing their money a different direction.
I think that Jeremy, if you'd be down for it, and of course if it works for Steve, maybe we should focus more on what I think is the core disagreement about the truth of Christianity, because it seems more to me that you derive the age of the universe and your ideas on those sorts of scientific concepts more from a biblical standpoint.
Yes.
And so I think that might be a more interesting discussion, just to focus on the core ideas here.
Okay. Yeah, and I try to make that clear that I don't think I can use science to support Christianity. So I'm trying to use science to support creationism. That could be an alien, that could be an entity. So anyway.
Yeah, well, it's always aliens. We're going to go with aliens, right? I'm not saying it's aliens.
Well, I consider Jesus a hyperdimensional extraterrestrial, so I'm good with that.
Don't do that. No, don't. Please.
Oh, he is. He's outside of these three dimensions.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. So, have you ever heard of a book called Uranta?
No.
Probably before your time. Uranta book had a lot of weird things like that. Jesus was a galactic being that had this like seven different types of alien races that he was joining together. It was really, really bizarre. It's huge too. I mean, we're not talking a small book. It was kind of like Dianetics on steroids way back when.
Oh wow.
Yeah. It was the Raelians. Yeah, I looked at that Uranta stuff years ago, and I was like, this is like, I thought it was people writing it as fiction, but I guess actually people really believed it. But anyways, I know we got to wrap it up. So Vanguard, why don't you take us out a little bit? By the way, thank you for coming in, Jeremy, for Vanguard's request. I will be happy to set these things up if people want, but not just for my Patreons either. Like I said, anybody who watches the show, I'm happy to take care of, and if I can arrange something like that, I will. But Vanguard, why don't you kind of take us out here?
Well, I guess I'm not entirely certain on how to close this, but I definitely enjoyed the discussion we had here, and I thought it was pretty interesting, and I hope we both learned something out of it. And yeah, I think you're a pretty cool guy, Jeremy, and I enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. I enjoyed it too. I think you're a cool guy.
Thanks.
Awesome. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and we will probably see you on Rum and Coke Night. Actually, there's going to be a discussion on the Great Debate Community channel on Saturday. It's going to be on Trump. What can go wrong there?
I'll talk about Thomas Sowell instead.
Who? I don't. You know what? I hate econ. I took macro and micro, and It was one. I got to tell you, while I'm ending the stream here, macroevolution, macroeconomics was the hardest course I've ever had to take. I got a B. It was hard. Good night, guys.